There is a kind of loneliness that rarely looks like what people imagine. It moves quietly and settles beneath the surface of a person's life, concealed behind easy laughter, constant productivity, and the familiar explanation that someone has just been busy lately. Beneath all of that, there is a steady ache that refuses to fade. It is not the experience of being physically alone. It is the deeper feeling of realizing that no one truly knows who you are, that if you slipped away for a time, the world around you might continue without noticing until much later, that even in moments of triumph or crisis, you are unsure who you could honestly turn to. This silence grows slowly inside a person. It is not dramatic or loud. It is consistent, shaping the way someone thinks, altering how they see themselves, and quietly influencing the way they move through the world. People often assume that those who live without close friends are distant or uninterested in others, yet that assumption usually misses the complexity beneath the surface. Sometimes the reality is the opposite. Some individuals care so deeply that they become overwhelmed by the weight of every interaction. They notice subtle shifts in tone, slight changes in energy, small smiles that signal more discomfort than warmth. Over time, this heightened sensitivity leads them to withdraw. They pull back, not out of dislike for people, but because genuine connection begins to feel risky. Psychologically, this kind of solitude reshapes the mind. When a person goes too long without meaningful social bonds, the brain starts to register isolation as a type of threat. It activates the same neural systems linked to physical pain, which is why loneliness does not stay confined to emotion. It becomes a physical experience that affects heart rhythms, disrupts sleep, and sharpens the mind's tendency to scan for danger, even where none exists. Human beings evolved within tribes where separation once meant real vulnerability. That ancient wiring remains, even in a world where someone can be surrounded by thousands of digital interactions and still feel profoundly unseen. Attention is not the same as connection, and validation is not the same as intimacy. Being noticed is different from being understood, a truth that people who drift into friendlessness often know more deeply than anyone else. Most of them did not choose this path in a single moment. They did not wake up one morning deciding they no longer needed others. It usually happens gradually through small disappointments that accumulate over years. There are moments when you offer something personal and someone responds with laughter that cuts deeper than they realize. You trust another person with something fragile, and it becomes material they later use against you. You try to open yourself, yet the feeling of being misunderstood settles in like a cold draft. Over time, the mind begins to draw conclusions. It feels safer not to risk anything. So the reaching out stops, the texting first stops. You begin telling yourself that solitude suits you. At first, you might believe it because being alone can feel calming. It offers control. It offers space, but with enough time, that peace slowly shifts into something heavier. Solitude begins to move from healing to haunting, because even the most self-sufficient person is wired for connection. Every human being longs to be seen, to be mirrored, to feel the steady presence of another mind that recognizes their inner world. When years pass without that sense of closeness, something inside begins to shift. The internal dialogue grows louder than anything outside of you. You find yourself in constant conversation with your own thoughts, replaying memories of friendships that faded or betrayals that still echo. You wonder at what point things took a turn. Sometimes the blame falls inward, sometimes it shifts outward. Most of the time it is neither. It is the complex interplay between psychological wiring and emotional wounds. Psychology has a term for this pattern called learned social helplessness. After trying to connect repeatedly and feeling the sting of failure, the brain unconsciously associates reaching out with rejection. Even when good people appear later in life, people who are warm, open, and genuinely kind, the protective walls remain in place. You may insist that you feel fine being alone, but somewhere in the depth of your inner world, there is still a hunger for the one person who understands without long explanations. The more you long for that kind of resonance, the more distant it can feel. Loneliness has a way of distorting the sense of self. It plants quiet ideas, such as being too overwhelming or not interesting enough. It convinces you that others have better places to be. And gradually those ideas take root. You begin rejecting yourself before anyone else can. The isolation becomes an act of self-preservation rather than pride. What makes this experience even more complex is that loneliness rarely looks the way people expect. Many individuals who have no close friends appear entirely composed. They go to work, they create, they smile for photos posted online. Yet beneath the surface, they navigate two realities. There is the outward self, shown to the world, and the inward self, that feels distant from everything around them. They construct a version of themselves capable of functioning without connection, but that version often feels hollow, as if they are watching their own life play out from a distance. It is easy to judge people who walk through life without close bonds. They are often labeled as strange, or difficult, or uninterested. But when you listen carefully to their stories, a different picture emerges. You hear traces of a quiet heartbreak, woven through moments where they offered too much of themselves to people who never cared enough to stay. Over time, that quiet heartbreak begins to shape a person's entire sense of self. Intimacy starts to feel dangerous. Vulnerability feels like a risk that only leads to regret. So they adapt by learning to live without closeness, but the cost of that adaptation is far heavier than it appears. Without genuine friendship, the world gradually narrows. Emotions echo inside the mind with no one to help interpret them, no one to offer a softer angle or a grounding presence. Psychologists note that extended isolation can slowly weaken a person's ability to express empathy. It is not that they stop caring, it is that the rhythm of emotional exchange becomes unfamiliar. Empathy functions much like a muscle, and when it is not exercised, it begins to fade. People who spend long stretches alone sometimes drift into emotional numbness. This numbness is not a deliberate choice. It is the brain's way of shielding itself from the ongoing pain of unmet connection. Yet something paradoxical unfolds beneath that numbness. Individuals who lack close friendships often yearn for deep connection more intensely than anyone else. They think about it with remarkable clarity. They analyze it, imagine it, idealize it. They search for meaning in brief moments, in small gestures, in passing smiles. When something becomes rare, the smallest glimpse of it feels significant. But loneliness does not merely influence the emotional world, it shapes behavior in subtle and powerful ways. Research shows that people who have been isolated for long periods often become acutely sensitive to social cues. They overinterpret messages. They assume distance where none exists. They read meaning into silence and search for hidden intentions that were never there. After enough experiences of being rejected or forgotten, the brain begins scanning for signs of repetition, even when the threat is invisible or imagined. This creates a loop that becomes difficult to break. You grow cautious. That caution is felt by others as distance. They assume disinterest or detachment, and they withdraw. Their withdrawal reinforces the loneliness you were hoping to escape. None of this is a personal failure. It is simply the way the mind attempts to shield itself from emotional harm. Another strange psychological effect begins to emerge as well. Loneliness changes the perception of time. When there is no one to share daily experiences with, time stretches, days lose their distinct edges, weeks blend together. Weekends and holidays lose their significance because those markers only matter when there is someone to experience them with. Psychologists have found that loneliness reshapes the way a person experiences time itself. Minutes seem to stretch, hours carry a heavier weight. When someone feels disconnected, they end up living more inside their thoughts than within the rhythm of daily life. Yet within that silence, something unexpected can emerge. Solitude, when entered intentionally, has the potential to transform. Many of the most reflective, creative, and emotionally attuned individuals throughout history spent long periods alone. The difference lies in whether the solitude is chosen or imposed. Chosen solitude heals, forced solitude hardens. One brings you back to yourself, the other convinces you that you are unworthy of being understood. For many people who drift through life without friends, it becomes difficult to know which version they inhabit. They may say they are not social people or that they prefer being alone, but beneath the surface they often miss a very specific kind of connection. The kind of laughter that comes effortlessly with someone who understands them. The kind of conversation where they do not need to edit themselves before speaking. The kind of silence that feels comforting rather than heavy. It is easy to forget that friendship is more than casual interaction. Friendship serves as a mirror that reflects hidden parts of the self. Without that reflection, it becomes harder to recognize personal growth, or even to know whether growth is happening at all. Human beings do not fully develop their sense of self in isolation. They shape it through the presence of others. When that reflecting surface is absent, a person can begin to feel untethered, as if their existence does not echo anywhere. This is the quieter pain that follows those who have no close friends. It is not only the ache of loneliness, but the deeper ache of feeling invisible, of existing without being truly witnessed. Yet beneath that ache, there often exists a remarkable depth of understanding. People who have felt unseen tend to notice others more carefully. They recognize what it feels like to be overlooked, so they become the ones who catch subtle signs of discomfort. They are the ones who quietly check on others because they know what it means to move through the world unnoticed. Maybe this is the quiet paradox at the center of this kind of loneliness. The people who go through life without close friends often carry within them the capacity to be extraordinary friends, if only someone would take the time to truly see them. There comes a moment, often subtle, when a person who has lived too long in emotional isolation begins to understand that simply waiting to be discovered may never be enough. Healing starts to look less like finding the right people and more like rediscovering the person they were before silence became a habit. Real friendship can only grow where a sense of self-trust already exists. When someone believes their voice has value, they begin to speak more freely. When they believe their needs are legitimate, they stop hiding them. Without that inner permission, the cycle continues. They remain unseen, unheard, and unexpressed. Many people who move through life without friends live in the shadow of early experiences. They recall moments when they felt too different, too sensitive, or too introspective for the world around them. Perhaps they were the child who preferred quiet creativity while others played loudly. Perhaps they were kind but not bold enough to stand out. Or perhaps they cared deeply about things others found trivial. Over the years, that difference became a kind of armor. They pretended the sting didn't matter. They convinced themselves that standing apart was a choice. Yet the difference itself was never the problem. The problem was the meaning they learned to attach to it. Growing up, misunderstood, can lead a person to assume that something within them must be flawed. They begin to shrink themselves, speak less, feel less, expect less. Eventually, they become a version of themselves that no longer reflects the person they once were, making it harder for even the right people to recognize or connect with them. The psychology beneath this pattern is rooted in human survival. The human brain evolved to belong to tribes, groups, families, to someone. When belonging begins to feel dangerous and every attempt leads to hurt, the mind adopts avoidance as protection. Avoidance turns into a shield, and that shield eventually becomes loneliness. This is why so many lonely individuals appear composed on the outside. Their nervous system has learned to anticipate rejection long before it arrives. They live in a state of constant self-monitoring, careful not to be too intense or too noticeable. What often goes unseen is that the longer someone lives this way, the more they fade from their own awareness. It becomes like dimming their own light in an attempt to avoid the wrong attention, only to discover that they can no longer attract the kind of people who might have truly understood them. Psychologists often refer to something called social self-concept, the inner image you build of yourself based on how you believe others see you. When someone has spent years being overlooked or excluded, that inner mirror becomes warped. They begin to expect dismissal wherever they go. Even when another person approaches with sincerity, they struggle to trust it. Kindness feels suspicious, Compliments feel exaggerated, interest feels temporary. This is one of the harshest effects of prolonged loneliness. It creates distance, not only from other people, but from the belief that belonging is possible at all. Yet the human mind is far more adaptable than it feels in those moments. The ability to connect never disappears. It simply grows quiet and needs time to resurface. Much like a muscle that has been unused for too long, social trust can rebuild itself through the smallest acts of courage. It begins with simple gestures, returning a smile when someone catches your eye, responding to a message without spiraling into overanalysis, allowing yourself to say yes, even when fear whispers no. The goal is not instant confidence. It is the gentle willingness to let the world touch you again, one interaction at a time. Friendship is not built through perfection. It grows through presence, through showing up as an imperfect human being willing to be seen. What often goes unnoticed is that many people who have lived in loneliness carry remarkable emotional depth. They think with nuance. They observe quietly. Years spent watching from the edges give them a sharp understanding of human behavior. They recognize sincerity. They feel subtle shifts in tone. They sense when someone is being genuine or when someone is offering a performance. This sensitivity is why superficial relationships rarely satisfy them. They crave meaningful connection, yet the very depth they long for can also frighten them. They end up building walls with windows. There is a desire to connect, but only under conditions of safety, steadiness, and silence that feels comforting instead of hollow. Those needs are not demanding or dramatic. They are deeply human. Still, another truth sits beneath all of this. Friendship requires vulnerability, and vulnerability can feel overwhelming when someone has spent years guarding themselves from hurt. Emotional exposure is essential for forming bonds, yet for those who have been wounded before, it can feel like walking barefoot across broken glass. The risk becomes too much. Many choose avoidance instead, insisting they are fine alone. But that is rarely the full story. Often they are not avoiding people, they are avoiding the exhaustion of being the only one who tries. There is a quiet paradox hidden in the moment someone stops trying. The very act of withdrawing confirms the fear that kept them alone in the first place. It becomes proof that isolation is the only possible outcome. That is how the psychology of loneliness sustains itself, not because a person is incapable of connection, but because the mind becomes too frightened to risk what feels unpredictable. Yet, imagine if connection were not a performance, but an act of honesty. Imagine if friendship were not something to earn, but something to allow. The people who truly resonate with you will never require you to impress them. They will meet you where you are. They will sense the quiet within you and recognize it not as emptiness, but as depth. Sometimes the first step toward connection is not finding new people, but grieving the versions of yourself who settled for far less than you needed. The version who begged for attention. The version who accepted tiny fragments of affection and called it care. The version who silenced their truth out of fear of being left behind. When those parts begin to heal, something subtle but powerful shifts. You stop attracting from yearning and begin attracting from steadiness. That shift changes the way you see others and the way you see yourself. There is a strange sense of freedom that emerges when you stop chasing and start understanding. Being alone no longer signals something broken. It signals that you have been waiting for alignment. You begin to recognize that the right connections bring peace into silence rather than discomfort. They feel natural, like breathing instead of performing. Loneliness, when approached with awareness, becomes a teacher. It clarifies the type of company your inner world truly longs for. It shows you the energy you bring into relationships. It asks you to cultivate a foundation strong enough that when the right people finally appear, you can meet them with presence rather than fear. Many people who have lived without close friendships develop a profound level of self-observation. They reflect. They question. They grow in ways others may never have the space to explore. That depth, formed quietly in solitude, becomes the very quality that draws the right individuals later in life. People who see not only who you are, but who you have become because of everything you endured alone. Healing from extended isolation is slow work. It cannot be forced or faked. It begins with gentle self-acceptance, with learning to speak to yourself in the tone a compassionate friend would use. When the mind whispers that no one cares, answer softly that you are learning to care. When the thought insists that you will always be alone, reply that you remain open to being found. The brain listens. It adapts. Neural pathways shift through repetition rather than sudden transformation. The more you affirm the possibility of connection, the more aware you become when moments of genuine warmth appear. And they will. Loneliness is not a lifelong sentence. It is a psychological winter. And even the coldest seasons eventually make room for warmth when you allow yourself to lean toward change. The truth is that living without friends does not diminish your humanity. It simply makes your story quieter. And quiet stories can carry remarkable power. They can be full of creativity, introspection, and meaning. Many of the most influential thinkers, writers, and creators spent long stretches of life in solitude before they ever found a place where they truly belonged. When connection finally arrived for them, it was richer and more grounded because they had already learned to value their own company. If you find yourself without friends right now, there is something important to understand. You are not broken. You are not unworthy. You are in the middle of becoming someone you have not yet fully met. The world has not overlooked you. It is waiting for you to see yourself clearly again. There will come a moment when you sit across from someone who speaks to you with a kind of familiarity that feels almost ancient, someone who makes you think you have known them your entire life. In that moment, the years you spent asking what was wrong with you will take on a different meaning. Solitude will no longer look like punishment. It will look like preparation. Every quiet evening, every unanswered message, every ache you carried in silence has been shaping you. Those experiences have been strengthening the parts of you that will allow you to hold real connection when it finally appears. In time, you stop seeking the crowd and begin valuing the rare moments when someone truly resonates. You stop chasing attention and start noticing the quality of the energy around you. Friendship begins to reveal itself, not as a numbers game, but as a kind of recognition. It happens in the quiet moment when two people look at each other and both think they might not be as alone as they once believed. That recognition becomes a quiet bond formed not through constant conversation but through shared understanding. Two people who have both known loneliness in their own way choose, even silently, not to let each other feel it again. Connection has never required perfect people. It has always been about honest ones, the ones who sit comfortably with your silence, the ones who laugh with real warmth at the small imperfections you usually hide, the ones who see beauty in the layers you have spent years trying to make sense of. Those are the people worth waiting for. When they arrive, something inside you settles. You finally feel understood, not as the version you built to protect yourself, but as the person you were always meant to be. Until that moment comes, walk gently with yourself. Speak with kindness toward your own thoughts. Even if no one sits beside you right now, you remain worthy of being known. You remain worthy of companionship. You remain part of the wider human story, connected in ways you cannot always see, even in your quietest hours. One day, you may meet someone who once lived without friends too. You will recognize a familiar stillness in their eyes, a depth formed by silence and reflection. You will smile, and they will return it. In that brief exchange, two long and lonely worlds will begin to bridge themselves. Loneliness is never the final chapter. It is only the place where the next chapter slowly takes shape.